Fans of Razer and Sony have kind of been left in the dust, but that's about to change with the Raiju V3 Pro for PlayStation 5 and PC. And if I could summarize this video in 10 seconds, the important part is V3. We've had an Xbox controller last year, mobile controllers a couple of months back, and also a PC controller. And now we have the PlayStation version that retains all the features that makes the V3 line amazing, but also being adapted for the PlayStation platform. And so without further ado, we'll take it for a spin so I can tell you all about it. And in the box, you'll really find two things: this case and this little box here, which I believe is just the cable. Oh, cables and different back paddles. Okay. One of the unique aspect that this one has versus every other V3 controllers in the line. Nice, almost velour-like kind of feel. Nothing in the bag. There's no hole poking to charge the controller while in the case. Some room for the cable. The cable, which is not braided, but is quite flexible and seems to be, I want to say, about 2 meters long. You have the controller, two replacement stick caps, one that is a mushroom style like what we find on older PlayStation controllers, and the other is like what's already on the controller, but this one is higher. So if you like a raised stick, especially for your right stick, you have the dongle that can be used both on PC and on PS5. So if you want to use the controller wirelessly, you can use that, or of course it can also be used wired. And you have this little screwdriver, which is going to be for one very specific part, and that part is going to be the back button. So it comes pre-installed with some models, but you also have different ones that are going to have a slightly different shape. I'm recording this portion after the fact because I didn't realize what those extra back paddles were, which is to feel seamless with the body, with the shell of the controller. These are designed to remove the back paddles to be what I would assume, in some cases at least, tournament compliant. Technically, you can still push the buttons, and you guys are probably not going to hear it. If you push very awkwardly, you can still hear the click from the buttons. As much as in the right angle I can sort of push it, it would be for sure counterintuitive. I would wonder if that could potentially have some tournaments not feel this is compliant, even if nullifies the button, because there's no way this is efficient. You just cannot push it easily as you would a button, but you can still push it somehow. So it's just very hard to do. But at the same time, I mean, Razer, having worked with pros, I would assume that they made sure that this would be considered compliant. So I wouldn't worry too much, but you know, just something to keep in mind. So let's go around the controller face buttons. They are the gametechtalk from Razer. So essentially we're talking about a micro switch. Same goes for the D-pad. And both of them have their PBT treatment, which gives a little bit of a grittiness to the feel of the plastic. Same goes for the shell, and it's going to prevent the fading of your keys. Your sticks are TMR, and that's one of the big changes with the V3 line, is their sticks are all TMR, and they are phenomenal. That's definitely one of the strong, very strong aspects of all the V3 controllers that I've tested so far, and this one is no exception. It is beautiful, and even without putting it through its paces, I can already tell you this is going to be the best sticks that you'll find on PlayStation until something better comes about. That's how good these sticks are. They're really well designed and well executed. You have your trackpad that clicks, your PlayStation button, your capture button, your mute for your microphone, because we do have a 3.5mm jack. Your bumpers, your triggers, they don't mention if they're Hall effect or if they're just traditional. I would doubt it. I would assume that they're probably Hall effect, but this is not confirmed. Razer calls them their Pro Hyper Trigger, so that's what we have to work with. And beyond the way that they operate to read the data, they do have a hair trigger that is button activated. So we're not talking about something that's just distance shortened with software correction. We're talking about a proper button that also, I'm pretty sure, is micro switch. At least it sounds and feels like one, so best to assume that it is. When talking about your 4 extra buttons, they're also micro switch. Now what's interesting is the micro switch you have here and then your face buttons and D-pad don't exactly sound the same, but they all feel amazingly good. So that's definitely the case here. And for the top buttons as well, they are micro switch, but these are probably the shortest in terms of travel that you find on the entire controller. And that is it. Of course, you have your USB-C that also has some kind of a cable guard. This was sent for review, so thank you to Razer for giving me the opportunity to review it for you guys. If you don't know, this collection has been, especially the PlayStation model, been designed from the ground up with pros, with competitive esports players. They really tailored it for that kind of crowd. So if you're an esport kind of person, you'll be happy to know. I love rumble, so for me it's like ugh. But you'll be happy to know that they don't have rumble. They also don't have gyro. Those features are non-existent on this controller. Doesn't matter that you're on PC or PS5. You just don't have the necessary components to have rumble or gyro. But not to worry, it does make up for a lot in its software. There's a lot of things that you'll have in there. And at least to my knowledge, I have yet to hear about a controller on a PS5 that has a companion app running on the PS5 itself. But Razer did come up with a solution. If you're on the PC, it's easy. You can use Synapse, and we'll go over it in a second. If you are on your PS5, the way that you're going to make changes to your controller is by using a mobile app, and that means that this controller does have a LE, so low energy Bluetooth signal that can be sent through your phone. But that signal will only be good to make adjustments on the controller. That doesn't mean that you're going to be able to connect Bluetooth to something like an iPhone or an Android to control the controller. That's unfortunately not something we will be able to do. And beyond that, some other features that it has, just before we go to software, is SOCD. So that's a first. I have never heard of something like that on a controller. And unless I'm understanding this wrong, I don't really know how this could actually, you know what, as I was saying, I know how we will be able to use it, and I'll probably showcase it during the software. The thing is, you cannot push, the way that the D-pad physically is made, you cannot push both the left arrow and the right arrow at the same time. So when I saw it, I was like, why is that there? But I guess I forgot about those 6 extra buttons. We'll test that out, which, talking about, let's go straight into software. And real quick, we don't have any RGB on this controller beyond this little LED that we have here for the status. The yellow is the PC mode, and the white mode seems to be the PS5 mode. Now, it's a little hard to distinguish because of the camera, but to the naked eye, it's very obvious which color that it is. When you're in Synapse, you can just go up there. You'll see the Raiju, and this is where you do all your modifications. Starting with top left, we have different profiles that you can quickly adjust by holding capture in one of the face buttons. And by the way, all those tweaks that we're doing will save on board of the controller, but it'll only work if you are on the PC mode, which I guess I forgot to mention. You have a switch here that lets you go from wireless to wired, and then another switch that lets you go from PS5 to PC. For a controller to work on the PS5, there needs to be a handshake, and as far as I understand, the handshake is different whether you are using wired or you're using wireless using the paired dongle with the controller. And so with that in mind, if you are going to use it wired, you need to be on the wired switch and PS5. If you're going to be using wireless, you need to be on wireless. Back to the software. Here you can do adjustments on the pulling rate from 250, 500, 1000, and to 2000. And that is specifically when talking about PC. When you're using it on the PS5, it's locked in terms of pulling rate and latency. You cannot address that at all. The D-pad SOCD settings, and this is what I was telling you about a moment ago. Here you have neutral, where both buttons are not considered held down. There you have the first input priority, which means that it will always return to the first input when it is released. And then you have the last, and then you just have no SOCD at all, which means that you can push both the left arrow and right arrow D-pad at the same time. But physically, like we mentioned ago, this is just not possible because it's hot, which means that it will rotate around the center point. So you're not able to do both. Here's what we're going to do. I'm actually going to map those back buttons to the left D-pad, because right now, if you look at D-pad tester here, you'll notice that if I push the left, it lights up. If I push the right, it lights up. There's no way I can push both at the same time. I'm gonna make this left D-pad, and I'm gonna make this the right D-pad. All right, so now whenever I push this back button, it does the left D-pad. Whenever I push this back button, it does the right D-pad. Right now, if I push the left, and then I push the right, it cancels out. That is what the regular any regular controllers should do. There may be instances where it's going to take the second input, but it will cancel out, it will nullify the first input. So here, it literally nullifies both. If we do first input priority, and then I do D-pad left, and then I do D-pad right, you'll notice that first input is still locked in. So if I release, so all of a sudden the second input is taken over, and if I push out, it's going to move, and so on and so forth. So it doesn't cancel out. Last input, it's going to do the opposite. So if I hold and then I push, it kicks it out, and if I release, it jumps back immediately. And so you could easily strafe like that very efficiently. Now the thing is, this only works for D-pad, so logically speaking, that shouldn't be working for the sticks. And then no SOCD cleaning, you can literally push both at the same time, but you'll notice that because D-pads are calculated on axes, it's not letting you. So rather it's doing the adjacent arrow. I was curious how that was going to work, but yeah, no, we cannot do two axes opposites at the same time. So yeah, that was a little bit of a long explanation. Hopefully that covers it. I have never seen that before on a controller. Now, how much is that going to be useful? That's for you to determine. But it's cool that this feature even exists. This is something that we're seeing more and more, especially in competitive keyboards. But at the same time, this is also a feature that is being blocked, and some people are getting banned for using it on keyboards. And so I don't think it would be anywhere near as harmful on a D-pad, but it's probably important to know that this is something that could potentially raise some eyebrows, especially in the competitive scene. So use with caution, or at least use knowing that you're not going to get flagged for having inputs that are behaving outside of the norm. Another thing you can do is change your D-pad from 4-way to 8-way. You can also address your top paddles and back paddles. And when on the PC, you're not limited to controller inputs. You can also do keyboard functions as well. But just know that this will only work when you're on the PC mode. And so if you try to carry that over to the PS5, it's not going to work. And going to the trigger tab, you can also address your triggers. Of course, right now I have them analog, but you can see the different levels, the different degrees here, but you can also make them digital if you want. And if you do that, it just jumps straight, but you still have the motion of a trigger. If you don't want to have that button, you can do that as well. You can change the actuation point. So if you want to have to go lower for the hair trigger to be activated whenever you're using the digital software corrected mode, that can be done as well. But another thing that is very interesting is the rapid trigger. Again, something that we've seen in keyboards, and it's something that we start to see in controllers. In fact, I know some GameSir controllers at least do have that feature as well. And what this is usually on triggers, you push it down, and if you have a hair trigger activated, like it is the case now, at a certain point, it will count as being activated, right? That makes sense. Usually, you would have to release the trigger and push it again for the value to be registered. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to push it all the way down, and you'll notice that it's pushed. That makes sense. But I'm going to release it just a little bit, and all of a sudden, I can push it again without having to wait for the trigger to go all the way up. And so you're able to match that trigger with so little travel that you can essentially have what is called a rapid trigger, because you do not have to let it go all the way up. That's another feature that this product has. When looking specifically at the thumbsticks, you can address the dead zone. So if you want no dead zone at all, you can. Of course, the stick becomes extra sensitive. So usually you probably want to leave it at 3 or 5. Personally, I like 3. I like to feel movement very early on. I don't mind if I'm getting slightly false registers because I'm shaking a little bit or something like that. I don't care. I'd rather have that than having too much of it, and too little is probably just a little too aggressive as well. Now, keep in mind that if you're playing a game and you're not seeing that reflected in the game that you're playing, the reason is there are a lot of games that have pre-baked dead zones in them as well. So you lowering it all the way does not mean that it's going to feel like you have no dead zones in every game. That depends on the game itself. Now, another thing that you can do is address the circularity mode if you want standard or circular, and you can also prevent double dead zones, and that'll compensate. So essentially it's going to have what is, well, they don't describe it as such, but what it is essentially is a negative dead zone, and that's exactly to address what I mentioned a moment ago. this may work better on some games than others. So that's much of a trial and error kind of thing. You see if that works for you. If it does, you keep it activated. Personally, I keep it activated because there's also an algorithm behind this. As I understand it, if it's like really ruining a specific game, it'll understand that it's doing so by seeing the value and how it's impacting the game. So I believe there's on-the-fly correction, but if you would just rather not have that at all, you can just deactivate it. Then you have sensitivity clutch. Sensitivity clutch is something the first time I saw that, I was in shock. You need to map it to one of your controllers, and you'll have different options, either sensitivity clutch for your left stick, sensitivity clutch for your right stick, or sensitivity clutch for both your sticks. So just for argument's sake, I'm going to put it here. I'm moving my stick, right? And as I push this button, what it does is you'll notice my cursor can no longer go all the way. So it's going to make it so that your stick is going to move way less faster. So for example, say you're sniping, right? And you find that this is too much and you're trying to have really increment movements for precision. You can just have this toggle quickly at the push of a button, and all of a sudden you're halfway there. And this is what this little menu is here. It allows you to control the aggressiveness to how much it reduces the stick. So if I put it higher, you'll notice as I push the button that it has no impact at all. But if I push it all the way down, well, rather let's make it 1, and I move my stick, all of a sudden I can barely move. Whenever you have sensitivity clutch mapped to one of your buttons, unfortunately, you cannot have one button is 5%, one button is 10%. But quite frankly, this is a feature that is hardly nowhere else. There's not a whole lot of controllers that do this. It's not the only one on the market that do, but I would argue that it probably is the only controller on PlayStation to do this. So that's a great feature for the right person as well. Power is pretty straightforward. It lets you decide when the controller will fall asleep, or rather after how many minutes. And calibration also, being that TMR uses magnets, which by the way is impossible to drift. They also use low power, so that makes controllers last longer in general. And every now and then you want to calibrate them just to make sure that your sensor is reading your stick's physicality as good as possible. So this is how you would do it. You just go here and you click the thumbstick that you're trying to recalibrate. And so that sums it up for the software. Now, usually I go into an audio test and I test the D-pad and sticks, and I've already done all that, and quite frankly, this is exactly the same controller. Mine is the pulling rate versus the PC version that is lower, but other than that, it feels the same, the ergonomics are the same. So what I'm gonna do is I'll invite you to check after watching this video in the comment box. I will timestamp the video that I did on the 8K version for PC, right where those tests start. So if you want to tune in on how the D-pad feels, the stick feels. Okay, so when looking at performance, we can achieve up to 2000 Hertz polling rate. And when looking at sticks and button latency, it is quite similar, just slightly slower than the 8K PC version. It's still amongst some of the fastest controllers we've ever seen on the entire market, so that shouldn't be a concern for anyone to have. When looking at the PS5 mode, however, which by the way, you can still use on PC, but there's absolutely no reason why you would do that. And you may notice that I don't have sticks latency when using it on the PS5 mode. For some reason, it was just not working. I'm unable, unfortunately, to get those numbers for you guys. What I can say, however, is that there is an obvious difference if you're using the PS5 mode, both in terms of the pulling rate, but also the button latency. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to run exactly with those numbers on the PS5. PS5 employs its own methods, which of course is impossible for me to benchmark, but at least if you're using that mode on PC, I would advise against it. Stick to the PC mode when you're on the PC and the PS5 mode when you're on PS5, because, you know, really it's your only option. I can at least confirm that the polling rate is exact. This is what you get when you're playing on the PS5, which is 250 Hertz. When talking about the polling rate, stick, and button latency on PC when using the dongle, There is also a very clear observation here, which here you will lose some performance. In fact, you will have a quarter of the pulling rate. And in terms of stick latency, it jumps to approximately 5 times the latency. You want to avoid that as well. And when it comes to button latency, you're about 4 times slower as well. So ideally, you will really stick to wired. It's still not bad numbers, okay? Let's just put that out the way, but it's nowhere near as good as what you have on wired. And last but not least, when looking at the PS5 when using the dongle, dare I say, it's even worse. You have a pulling rate that is approximately 80% of what we had when wired, and you have a button latency that is approximately 5 times slower on the dongle. So again, I can't stress this enough. That does not reflect the PS5 numbers. And I did play on PS5 and it didn't feel like that was the case. So I'm pretty sure that these performances are potentially to dissuade people from using the PS5 mode on PC. Potentially that Sony wanted to make sure to not, lose that market, because they are selling a lot of DualSense controllers for PC. It's possible that it's an agreement in the licensing that Razer had with Sony. I wouldn't be surprised. It's very known for controllers aficionados that Sony is not easy to deal with when it comes to get a licensing for the PlayStation platform. The takeaway here is this: if you're playing on PC, you should only ever use the PC mode. If you're playing on PS5, that's easy. It's decided for you. You have to use the PS5 mode. As for wired on PC, it's also best. When it comes to dongle, I couldn't discern any noticeable difference versus a regular DualSense or DualSense Edge when playing on the PS5. And so as far as I'm concerned, it was just as good. Every mode possible on this controller are D input. They're not X input. And the reason why I mentioned that is mainstream platforms, mainstream operating system, iOS, iPadOS, macOS, out of the question, Android, Steam Deck, so Linux. Linux, they may differ, but if we're talking specifically Steam Deck, you'll be good to go. And of course, Windows PC, you'll be good to go as well. One last thing to mention, we are using a 900 milliamp hour battery, but because of the TMR sticks, this thing lasts a pretty long duration. And also, we don't have gyro, we don't have rumble. So, you have a lot of controllers that have bigger batteries, if we're being honest, but this one still outshines most of the options out there because there's a lot of those features that are removed from this product. In terms of duration, we're talking about up to 36 hours on a full charge. So that'll last you more than a day. As long as you plug it every day, you're never gonna have an issue. And even then, you should be fine. So that brings me to the conclusion. If you are on the PlayStation ecosystem and you are specifically an esports and competitive player, truly what I've experienced puts it absolutely able to rival something like the DualSense Edge. And while the DualSense Edge still has some benefits, so does the Razer Raiju V3 Pro. For example, 6 extra buttons, you don't have that on the DualSense Edge. The sensitivity clutch, you don't have that on the DualSense Edge. It's also lighter and it has a way longer battery duration. Same goes, you don't have that on the DualSense Edge. Let's not make any mistakes though. This is a controller for the competitive players. This is a controller for your Call of Duty, for your Battlefield 6, for fighters. This is not a controller to play Astrobot. Not that you couldn't, of course you could, but it's not built for that. You might as well just use a regular PS5 controller, especially if you're looking for rumble, looking for gyro, looking for immersiveness. There's another crowd that could be interested with this one, especially players that want something for the PS5 and something for the PC. And look, if PS5 is somewhere in that equation, what I like with this one is that it does a lot of things great to close the gap with a lot of controllers on the market that people are going to buy for PC. And with that in mind, it's still one of the greater options for PC gaming as well, especially if you use wired. But at the same time, there is not a doubt in my mind, if you're looking for a PC controller primarily that you're essentially never going to be using on a PS5, you want to get their 8K for PC version, which is going to be superior in pulling rate and latency. It won't have the trackpad, but you won't need the trackpad, even though it's cool because you can control the mouse on PC, but how often are you really going to need that? I don't think you will. Ultimately, I think the primary thing here is going to be that you're able to use it on the PS5. And if you don't need that, I think you're much better off with the 8K for PC. But if you do need them both, that's the beauty of it. It's a controller that will perform extremely well on both platforms. And so that is it. One last thing. Did I don't think I mentioned the price. I think I forgot to mention the price. My bad, guys. So this is $220 launching today as you see this video. So make sure to pick it up if you're interested. As always, if you have any comments, make sure to drop them in the comment box, to like if you enjoy this video, and to subscribe to not miss any future ones. I'm Clef. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.